Okay, so this is a re-recording of Source 5 in Common Sense Economics. I noticed that there's a lot of the stuff in here that wasn't really necessary. It isn't really something that I cared to include. So you're still free to look at the slides that I'm skipping in this, but I'm re-recording this just because I only want to include the stuff that is necessary, and with the stuff that is unnecessary, it stretched the lecture to being way longer than I would like it to be. So this is Source 5, Monetary Stability. Feel free to go look at any of the slides that I am skipping on your own, but you're only required to understand and comprehend the slides that I am going over. So if you don't understand them, please ask me. Especially if you don't, then you go and look at it in the book and you still don't understand it. Okay, so please come and ask me questions regardless. Okay, let's get going. So this is about monetary stability. We've talked about money and how we need to have markets for money, but what about money being stable? Well, first we kind of got to have to look at why we use money, right? That's something we're gonna have to focus on first, right? And then we'll need if we know what money is, we'll know what it means then to have stable money. Okay, so this cartoon does a great job of showing why money was invented, right? You have this man, he's going to get a drink, and he can't, right? All he has is the cow, but the cow has value, the drinks have value, but they're not similar in value, so they're not exactly going to be able to trade, right? It's not like he can say, can you break a cow for me, right? So maybe this guy could just give him everything behind the bar, and maybe that would equal a cow. But this guy with the cow probably doesn't want everything behind the bar. Okay, so there's a great Ed and Eddie episode that shows trade in action, and I've been able to watch it for the past 3 years and show it to my students. But unfortunately, it's been blocked. Not blocked. It's been finally taken down due to copyright. The episode is Who, What, When, Where, Ed. If you'd like to find it and watch it on your own. But giving a synopsis on the episode, they need to get an egg to make an omelet, and to get the egg, they have to trade their friend Rolf. And Rolf, in order to trade them, in order to give them the egg, he wants sawdust. So to get the sawdust, they have to go paint a shed. To paint a shed, they need to go get paint. To get the paint, they need to go get clams. To get the clams, they need it, and so on and so forth. And they finally get the last item, and then they trade it all the way back to get the egg. So you can see how inefficient that is, right? Because if you guys want an egg, what do? You just go to the store, right? But they were using a system called bartering. And bartering is when you're trading one good or service for another good or service. For example, if I wanted a haircut, I'd have to go find somebody that can cut hair and wanted to learn about economics, right? Because that's what I provide of value. I teach economics. So I'd have to go find someone that wants to learn about economics and is also willing to cut my hair and able to cut my hair, right? But that's a very hard matchup, right? Finding someone who has exactly what I want and wants exactly what I have, right? It's very hard to find that. So instead what we do is we use money, okay? And money is anything that acts as these three things. And we will talk about these three things as we go through this, okay? So the first of which is a medium of exchange, okay? And this allows us to trade goods indirectly, right? When I go and buy a haircut, I'm still teaching to get a haircut. That's still how I'm getting a haircut. I'm still teaching economics for a haircut, but I'm trading indirectly, right? I'm teaching you guys economics, and because of that, taxpayers are giving me money, and I'm using that money to then go and buy a haircut, right? I'm still teaching in order to get a haircut in that sense. So I'm still trading indirectly, okay? So you notice money is now, it has its value because it reduces our transaction costs, right? I don't have to go out there and find exactly who has what I want and wants what I have. Instead, I just have to go out there and find somebody who has what I want, and I can give them money for it, right? Because everybody wants money. Not everybody wants to learn about economics. In the same way, someone doesn't have to make sure they have whatever I want in order to get an economics education from me, right? They just come to me with dollars, and I will gladly give them an economics education, okay? It reduces our transaction costs, and that's why money has value, right? Money is also useful in that it acts as a unit of account. We talked about this when we were talking about supply and demand, when we said that prices are a measure of relative scarcity. You see, dollars, or money in general, whatever currency it is, it allows us to be giving goods value and be able to compare those values, right? So it's kind of like, again, a meter stick for measuring the relative scarcity of something, right? It's a unit in the same way that feet and pounds and Fahrenheit are units. Money is a unit for measuring relative scarcity, okay? And lastly, it is something that allows us to store our value, okay? If I'm a educator, I can't exactly store what I produce of value, right? I can talk into a jar, close it up, and maybe give it to somebody. That's not going to work, right? A farmer who's gonna, growing their who's growing their food, and then they try to store it away, and they come back next year. That corn's not going to be looking so hot, right? That corn's not going to have any of its value, right? So it's important that these farmers they'll sell all of their food, and then they'll have money, right? And that money they can store away, and that money will keep on to its value, right? So money is important as a store of value. Keep this in mind as we start talking about stability in the money supply, okay? Now, if you want to make a distinction between money and currency, you certainly can do that, right? Because all currency is money, but not all money is currency. Okay, so currency is when we're specifying coins and paper bills that governments are creating. Okay, and you see, currency is interesting because it's something that we've created to specifically serve the purpose of being money. However, there are many things throughout history that they weren't paper bills, they weren't coins, but we still use them as money, right? Something like seashells, or there's this movie called Waterworld where they used dry sand as money, okay? So there's 6 characteristics that we have to look at, because I say there's all these things that have acted as money. So let's make sure we understand why some things are used as money and some things aren't. Well, it has to be durable, right? Whatever you're using, if it's going to be a store of value, it has to be durable. It has to be able to stay intact, right? If you're going to be exchanging it a lot, it has to be durable, right? Our dollars are not just flimsy paper. They have that fiber in them that makes them more durable, right? They have to be portable, yeah? You can actually take a lot of dollars with you relatively easily, right? Because it's paper. It's relatively light. Imagine taking gold with you, and you just get a big hunk. You maybe get a wheelbarrow. That'd be a lot of value that you're taking with you. But still, right? You can take, if you're going to take $1 million with you somewhere, that's a lot easier to take $1 million with you in in dollar bills than it would be to take it with you in gold. It'd be quite heavy, right? It has to be divisible. You have to be able to divide the money, right? Imagine that cow. That cow is not, well, you could divide the cow. It would just diminish the value of it, however, right? Unless you're butchering the cow to be sold in parts. But if I'm like buying a drink with my cow and they just cut off the a piece of the cow to take home, that's going to diminish the value of my cow because it's going to be dead. Okay, so it has to be divisible, right? If I give, if I'm buying something for $1 and I give someone a 5, I'm not just out of luck, right? I do get change back. So money has to be divisible. That makes it very useful in that way. And money has to be the same. It has to be uniform. And you kind of take this for granted, right? But you have to agree that money is worth what it's worth, right? Imagine if we were a little fishing colony out in the Pacific, and we're all on an island, and we use fish as our currency, right? And we said small fish, or not currency, sorry, we use fish as our money, right? Because currency is only paper bills and coins. We use fish as our money, right? We say a small fish is worth a certain amount, that can buy you a set amount of goods, and we say a large fish, well, that's worth, more, so it can buy you more goods and better goods. But what if I have a medium fish? Well, of course, if I have a medium fish, I think it's a large one, and you think that my medium fish is a small fish, right? So you can see how there can be some disagreements that arise, and that can really, really impact how much we're able to trade, right? Because then it just makes all of these medium fish just totally useless, right? Maybe you can see how that would be problematic. So when it comes to $5 bills, no one argues what a $5 bill is worth, right? A $5 bill is worth $5. And another thing is that money has to be limited in supply, right? Because if money is not limited, that will end up causing this little ditty called inflation. And those that have a lot of money, and then it turns out that money is not limited, all those folks that were maybe saving their money, all of that will then lose their value. For instance, just a little crash course on inflation here. Let's say there's $5 that exist in the entire world, right? And you own one of those $5. That means that you own 20% of the world's money. That means that you could buy a whole lot if you own 20% of the world's money, right? But what if magically 5 more dollars appeared? Well, you still own this dollar here, but you went from owning 1 out of $5, now you own 1 out of 10. So now you have half as much money, right? You still have the same dollar bills, but it's worth half as much since there are now 10 out there instead of 5, right? So your money can only buy you half as much. And that is what we call inflation, and we will see the effects of later during this lecture, okay? And last of all, it has to be acceptable, right? I could make some weaver bucks but they wouldn't be able to buy me much of anything, right? I'd go into Walmart and they would laugh at me, right? I wouldn't be able to get anything. So money has to be accepted if it's going to be good money. So, what if we didn't have money? What would that world look like? Could we trade as much? Well, think it acts as a medium of exchange, right? If I didn't have money, would I be able to go and find a barber who wants to cut my hair? Well, no, it would be much harder. I would have to go find someone that wants to know about economics, right? So it would be much harder for us to trade if we didn't have money, right? So because we have money, we trade more. And because we're trading more, we know that trade creates wealth. So therefore, because we use money, it increases our wealth. Now, if we look at the history of money, we've used various things as money throughout history, right? Of course, you think back to our earliest days using money. Of course, it's gold, right? The gold doubloons that we would trade with one another in our little coin pouches. And this is because gold has value in and of itself. You can make these shiny things out of it. We've always loved gold. and today, gold is not valuable just for its use inside of jewelry. Gold is also valuable because it's a relatively useful item when it comes to making electronics. Yeah. But of course, we haven't just used gold as money, even though it's been used as money throughout all of history, and it's always one of the earlier examples of us using coins as money. Because one way to demonstrate that gold was gold is that we would have the government take it and they would stamp their little face on it, and then boom, just like that, you have Caesar on a coin. And that showed that the government was saying, yes, this is gold and you can trade with this. You don't have to be worried about whether or not it's gold or not. And you can also be sure that it's a certain amount of gold, right? Made it easier to trade with. Another thing that we've used as money throughout history, if you look at the American frontier days, we would use animal hides as money, right? Beavers were really popular. Of course, you had deer pelts. Matter of fact, the term that we use for some of our money today, bucks, actually comes from this time, because some things would be priced in terms of deer hides or buck's skins, right? So, you want to buy this jacket. Oh, that's going to be $1. I looked it up. Apparently, it's true. Going on. Of course, you guys have heard the stereotypical thing that, cigarettes are the money that people use in prison to buy all sorts of services. You want to have a guy stabbed, give him a pack of cigarettes. Apparently, from what I've heard, the pop culture has got it wrong, or at least it's not true anymore, and packs of ramen are now the commodity money of choice in prison. So, hey, the more you know. Now, instead of giving someone a pack of smokes, you give them a pack of ramen, and they'll make sure that you get to make it to the lunchroom safely. I don't know. Okay. But, when we look at gold and we think about it, man, that's really heavy to lug around, right? Go back and think about how gold acts as this. Sure, it's durable, but is it very portable? Ugh, right? Is it very portable? Not really. So what people would do is that they would store their gold, and then they would have these pieces of paper that they would take out of a bank. They'd store their gold at a bank, and this bank would give them a slip of paper saying, hey, this person has this much gold here. So this note represents, this much gold, maybe an ounce of gold. And then people would trade with those notes. And then if you want, you would maybe sign the note, and that person could go take that note, then take it to a bank, and they'd be able to withdraw that gold. So it would be just like trading with gold, but you're not trading the gold anymore. You're trading these pieces of paper that represent the gold. So we call this representative money. It has its value because of what it can be exchanged for, right? So these are commodity monies because they get their value from themselves. These are representative monies because they get they get their value from what they represent, right? Matter of fact, the United States, we used to be on what was called the gold reserve, the gold standard, where all of our dollars represented a certain amount of gold somewhere that the United States had on hand. Today, however, we have what's called fiat money. And this is money that has no value except from the value given to it by the government. Fiat money is if you notice here, the note has changed, right? It used to say redeemable in gold. I'm reading right here on the top left. Redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve Bank. Whereas today it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So you notice the difference here. This note is valuable because we have gold to back it up. This note is valuable because we say so. Fiat money, if you'll kind of want to put it this way, you know, say that it has value because of our decree. We are the government. We're saying it has value. And something else to note here, folks, is that it's not just the government, right? Because it's also people that think that this fiat money is valuable, right? Myself, I think that dollars are valuable, right? Even people that think that it's a bad thing that we have our money not being backed up by gold. I'm sure they would have a very, very hard time giving up all of their dollars, right? If they think that it's not worth anything, then just go ahead, have them give me their dollars, right? If any of you think that this is silly and that that the United States money has no value, then just go ahead and give me yours, right? I know that you're not going to, because it does have value, because, you know, it's not just the government placing value, it's also a lot of people have placed value on it, and this is what a lot of people like to do their transactions in. Okay, so fiat money then gives the government the ability to just create more if they wanted to, whereas with representative money, if the government wanted to create more money, they would have to get more gold in order to do so. Okay, so fiat money in that case can tend to have some problems that we'll see here in a little bit, and this is all coming back again to monetary stability. Okay, so regardless of what kind of money you're using, whether it's the gold that we're talking about with commodity money, or if it's representative money or fiat money, money in any case is a highway, Adam Smith says. He says, the gold and silver money which circulates in any country may very properly be compared to a highway, which, while it circulates and carries to market all the grass and corn of the country, produces itself not a single pile of either. Think about roads, right? They bring goods to and from all sorts of places, but, you know, corn doesn't grow on the roads. It may grow next to them, but it doesn't grow on the roads, yet the roads are why the corn gets to where it needs to go. In the same way, money is the reason why items get to where they need to go, even though the money itself doesn't make the items, right? So again, it's kind of like our discussion about jobs, right? It's not jobs that matter necessarily. It's not jobs that matter. It's jobs that produce the things that we can consume that matters. It's not money that matters. It's that money is able to get goods to where they need to go, and the goods are what matter, right? Because we actually consume those, right? You can try to consume money if you want to, probably get a stomach ache and maybe get a disease. I don't recommend doing that, but the money itself, we can, you know, if we just print more money and have more, that doesn't actually solve any of our problems, right? We're not creating any more things for ourselves to use, but money is important because it is this highway. It reduces our transaction costs. It enables us to trade more, okay? So why do we use gold then, right? It's durable, it's divisible, it's uniform, right? Everyone agrees that gold is gold, so long as you make sure that you're not dealing with, you know, fool's gold. There is, you know, some metals that are relatively close to it, right, that are actually not as valuable. Gold is very limited. Everybody wants gold because it has a lot of uses, especially today with technology. And I said earlier that it's really hard to lug it around, but, you know, if you're taking a lot of gold around, that's a lot of value that you're taking with you, right? So, you know, back in the day when people were trading with gold, when you're carrying around some coins, you didn't have to carry around that many coins to be able to buy a lot. And you got to think, you know, as people are carrying this gold, is it you know, really that safe? People could take it. So what people would end up doing, because they were afraid of people stealing their gold while they were on the road, they would actually leave it with a blacksmith, and this blacksmith would give them a piece of paper, and that piece of paper said, you know, hey, this person has this much gold, you know, at the blacksmith. Come, you know, if it's signed, whoever holds this piece of paper signed can come and withdraw the gold. So this is actually how banks were made. People would store their gold at blacksmiths, because you really had to work with a blacksmith with your gold anyways, because if you wanted to have a smaller quantity of gold, or have it split up into smaller quantities, right? If I had a gold bar and I wanted to turn into gold coins, I'd have to go to the blacksmith and they'd have to do that for me. So we went from blacksmiths to eventually, throughout history, we started just having people specialize in holding money, and they were banks. You would take your gold to a bank. The bank would then give you a piece of paper saying, hey, this person owes, you know, this much in the bank, and then you could give that piece of paper to someone else, that representative money to someone else, and then they could then take that to the bank and withdraw the gold. And of course, that eventually evolved into the United States Central Bank, which we've had 3 total over the years, but now we're down to the last one, which is still running today, which is the Federal Reserve Bank. And we'll talk more about that later. But first, I want to talk about inflation, right? So we've already talked about inflation, right? It's the idea that, more money is coming into the market, right? More money is coming in, and because of that, your money is losing its value, right? Because there is more of it out there. We have more money chasing the same amount of goods, which means that your money isn't as valuable. It's not as scarce as it once was, so it's not as valuable. Because you're going to have to put up more money in order to get what you want, right? So this causes prices to increase, right? A lot of people think that inflation is just prices increasing. Well, sort of. It's a sign that inflation is occurring, but inflation is actually when money is losing its value. And this is largely due to more money being created, right? So inflation causes prices to rise because money is losing its value due to money being created. Now, because of this, prices are different from year to year. When we're looking at prices in a given year, like if we look at how prices of a hamburger in the 1930s were 15 cents, that is a nominal price. The nominal price of a hamburger in the 30s was 15 cents. I may be butchering it. That may not be the real price, but as an example, that's what it is. For today, the nominal price of a McChicken is what? $2? $1.50 maybe? It's been a while since I've been to McDonald's. I apologize. Or at least since I've looked at their prices. I had the spicy McNuggets anyways. Let's not get on a tangent. So, real prices then are when we adjust for inflation. And just to go over how this works, let's look at an example, okay? Look here at this graph. You can see the nominal gas price, okay? For example, at the turn of the century in the 1900s, gas was about 25 cents a gallon. Whew, that's a really low gas price, right? And it really stayed right around there, and it rose slowly over the end of the century. And we get to the 70s, and then the gas price actually starts increasing to about 75 cents. Then it spikes in the 80s to about $1.25, $1.40. And then it comes back down, but you can see how the gas prices were really low back then. Man, it must have been real nice to have those low gas prices. But you see, 25 cents back in the day could have bought you a lot more. Money was a lot more valuable back then. There wasn't anywhere near as much of it. So if we instead look at the inflation adjusted gas prices, we can see that adjusted for inflation, man, at the turn of the century, gas was actually really expensive. In 2015 dollars, gas costs almost $4, right? And we can actually see how over time, sure, it's had its up and downs, but relatively over time, gas has actually come down in price, right? The nominal price of gas in 2016 was $1.87. Today, it's like what? $2.30 most of the time. It floats around here in year 2020. So I'd much rather be paying the 2020 than these numbers here, right? So we can actually see, if we look at the average inflation adjusted gas price, gas has actually been floating around right around $2.64. Yeah, right around $2.64, at least in 2015. Okay, so while it may look that prices were lower back then, if we adjust those prices for inflation, we can actually see that they're relatively similar to today. Okay, we actually use this thing called CPI, and the way this number is, we come up with it, it's called the Consumer Price Index. It's a number that we'll use to inflate or deflate prices. I'll show you how we do that here in a second. But all it is they're taking a whole bunch of different goods from all of these different areas, like housing, food, transportation, medical care, all of these different areas, and they're just measuring how much they change in price each year, and then they take, okay, if all of these things are changing in this much of a price, they come up with a number that we can then multiply certain prices by in order to adjust them for inflation. So, for instance, again, I'm really only going to worry things about the startup here because I'm trying to save you guys time. What we can do then is that we can take those price indexes, and then we can either inflate a number or deflate a number. So if we wanted to look at how much the Titanic would have made if it were made in 1939 instead of 1997, we could take the current year value of the Titanic, how much it made in 1997, which was $658,679,302, and then we could multiply that by the price index of the previous year, and of the 1939 year that we want to take it to, and then we could divide that then by the 1997 CPI. All of this to say, folks, we can use this CPI number to see that, okay, because dollars had a lot different of a value, a lot bigger value, instead of making that 658 million in 1997, it would have made in 1939 it would have made 57 million, right? Because 57 million in 1939 would have been able to buy you a lot more back then than it would be able to buy you in 1997. Don't get me wrong, 57 million is still a large number, but we have deflated it. So if it were released during that time, that's how much money it would have grossed, right? So we can also inflate prices. So one thing we can look at is like a really, really big player like Babe Ruth. Well, Babe Ruth, the highest salary during his time was $80,000 a year, and you got to think the average person today is making like $4.5 million. That's crazy. I guess average person isn't the case. Average MLB player is making $4.5 million. But of course, there's been a lot of inflation, so of course the person playing today is going to be making a lot more money. So what we need to do is we need to be able to inflate Babe Ruth's salary, because let's be honest, the dude was living in a time when $80,000 could buy you a lot more than $80,000 could buy you today, right? In the same way that 15 cents, back in the day, could buy you a whole burger. Today, 15 cents can't buy you much of anything, right? So what we need to do is inflate it. So we take that Babe Ruth's salary, we multiply it by the CPI of the year that we want to translate it to. We divide all that then by the CPI of the previous year. So we take 80,000, multiply it by the price index, then we divide it by this, the current year's price index. And if he were alive today, he would make, or at least in 2016, he would have made $1.1 million, which kind of goes to show and reminds us, oh my goodness, why is it that an average person playing baseball in 2016 made more than the, most popular baseball player in the 1930s? Well, you got to think the average person today playing in the MLB is entertaining way more people than Baby Boy here entertained. Okay, so this is just an example of how prices are so different over time and how we can increase them, or at least we can inflate them or deflate them in order to compare salaries of today with salaries of the past, or prices of today with prices of the past. Okay, you can also you can also see this with movies. If you look at the highest grossing, highest nominal gross, how much these movies sold for when they were first produced, you can see that Avengers is right on top there. It grossed, what is that, $2 billion, $2.7 billion, almost $2.8 billion. That's because, well, look at the year. It's 2019. The money is a lot less valuable in 2019, right? If you look at the oldest movie on this list, Titanic, it grossed $2 billion in 1997. $2 billion was a lot more money in 1997 than it is today. It's still a lot of money today, don't get me wrong, but in the same way that a dollar could buy you more in 1997, $2 billion could buy you more in 1997, right? So sure, in 2019, Avengers Endgame did sell a lot, but this money here is less valuable than this money here. So we need to find a way to adjust for that. And matter of fact, thankfully, Wikipedia has a list just for that, where they do adjust it for inflation. And we can see that, oh my goodness, a movie from 1939 is still the highest grossing movie in the world, adjusting for inflation. In 2019 dollars, this movie had grossed $3.7 trillion. Not trillion, billion, sorry. $billion, okay? And then the Avatar is second, whereas on this list, Avatar is second. So Avatar was very, very close to being able to beat that record. It was off by $500 million. So I guess close in the realm of hand grenades. But Titanic is third. And let's see where Endgame is, all the way down here, right? And that's because it's in 2019 dollars. Right? These dollars, while 2.7, almost 2.8 billion is a lot of money, it's also in a time when those dollars don't have as much value. Okay? So, you can watch this video if you'd like to. It talks about how inflation can wreck economies. What we're going to talk about is some advice on this slide, and then we'll go on to more specific examples about inflation wrecking economies. So, guys, think about this. Inflation is always occurring. It happens at about 2% every year, okay? And because dollars are worth, different amounts throughout their time, and a dollar today is not worth the same amount as a dollar in the past. A dollar in the future is not worth the same amount as a dollar today. So when you're saving and investing, the bare minimum that your returns have to be, which we'll talk about, in the fourth part of this book, as well as in throughout the rest of this lecture today, is that when you're saving and investing, because inflation is always happening, you want to make sure you're getting more in return when you're loaning people your money. You want to make sure you get at least as much as inflation is occurring, right? So if inflation is occurring at 2% each year, you want to make sure you get back at least 2. Otherwise, if I'm getting 1% back on my money, but inflation is making my money 2% less valuable, I'm still losing 1% of what my money could buy me, right? So make sure that when it comes to saving and investing, you're aware, hey, my money is losing value, right? It costs to hold on to money, right? So that said, though, does that mean you should never hold on to money? Well, no. It makes sense to have, some money in savings, because when something goes wrong, you're going to want to have that money on hand, right? But don't think that when you're saving your money and holding on to it, that it's not costing you anything, okay? Because money, well, there's more and more of it being created every year, and because of that, your money is losing value, right? One person saw that after World War I, Germany was being blamed with the whole war, and they needed to pay reparations. So what Germany did was we'll just print what we owe, right? They thought, okay, if we just make the money and give the people what we owe them, we'll be good to go. And one economist, John Maynard Keynes, so he's like, I'm going to write a book about what I think will happen. What I think will happen because they're being forced to pay these reparations and the Germans are just going to print it. What he thought was going to happen, there's going to be a whole lot of inflation, and because of this, the value of their money is going to plummet, and they're going to be upset, right? The money that they have has lost all their value. And what he thought would happen was that there'd be a charismatic leader that would come to power, and they'd be able to get the masses around them, and then there'd be another war starting, because this person, instead of paying off their war debt, would just instead try to conquer the world. And that's what he foresaw. He foresaw the Nazi party coming to power. And all of this because of inflation. Look at this table here, guys. You can see the date and how many German marks are equivalent of dollars. This is their currency. At the end of World War I, right up to 1923, what we call hyperinflation. What happened here? So you can see that to buy an ounce of gold, you at first needed $170, but about halfway through the year, you then needed almost $500. Wow, dang. So imagine this. Imagine, at the beginning of this year, a loaf of bread costs $2, but at the middle of the year, it costs almost, $4. And then it almost triples in January of 1920. So this would be then, at the end of the year, then that loaf of bread would cost $12. That's insane, right? If we look here, yeah, sure, it did decrease in September of 1920, but it only increased thereafter. Look from January 1922 to September 1922 to buy a loaf of bread. Right? Imagine if a loaf of bread cost you $4, and then in the 6 months later, buying that loaf of bread cost you, here we go, almost $40. Wouldn't that be insane, right? You can see all of this here, how this was increasing dramatically, right? From 30,000 marks needed to buy an ounce of gold to 372,000 marks to buy an ounce of gold, increasing then from 372,000 to 269 million, from 269 million to 6.6 billion, from 6.6 billion to 24 to 84 to 1 trillion. 87 trillion by the end of 1923. Guys, look at this here. And look how fast this is happening, right? This here, they're looking at it and they're measuring it over a period of 6 month intervals. I guess, what is that? January to September, 9 month intervals. Any hoozy. If you look here, we get to September 1923. October 2nd, October 9th, October 16th, October 23rd. This is all happening within the span of a month. By the end, guys, they had an annual inflation rate of 1,000,000,000,000%. Wow. Trillion is a very, very large number, right? And to demonstrate this, I've shown you here $1 trillion. Okay? This is a football field, including the end zones. And this here is all pallets of money. I think it's actually it's double stacked pallets of money. Okay? And on those double stacked pallets of money, each pallet is made up of stacks of cash. And each stack of cash is made up with $100 bills. Okay? This is a lot of money that they were printing into existence. Okay? So to give you an example of how money had lost its value, I have these two fun stories here. So these two ladies in this first story, they're going shopping. And they see something in the display that they like. So they take their baskets, they set them down behind them, and they get closer to get a better look at the display. Okay, they wanted to buy it. So they turn around to pick up their basket of money, and the basket was gone. What? It's because the basket had more value than the money inside of it, right? And it's kind of laughable, right? I'm talking about, carrying around your money in a basket. There was so much money being printed that if you wanted to buy something, you had to carry around a basket of it. That's how much money had lost its value. And it gets even more silly when you think that, oh my goodness, the basket that people were carrying around their money in was more valuable than the money itself, right? That'd be like someone, stealing your wallet and leaving behind, your everything inside of it, right? Another funny story is that a man, he sees that when he sits down, the coffee at the coffee shop, as he sits down, costs 4,000 marks. He knows that he brought 4,000 marks in with him. So as he's drinking his coffee, he enjoys his morning, and he's about to pay. The waitress comes over and says, "Hello, sir, that'll be 5,000 marks." Shoot. By the time that he had sat down, or the time that he was leaving, the price of something had changed. That's how quickly the prices were changing, because that's how quickly money was entering into the market, right? So when you have a whole bunch of money being created, it causes this hyperinflation. We've seen this in countries like Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe actually has, I think, a $1 trillion bill. And then we've seen this in Venezuela recently. That's why there's been, recording this at night, why there's been a crisis in Venezuela, because their money is losing value. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and skip through this. You're free to look at these slides. I talk about the history of the U.S. Central Bank and how the Fed is structured, but all I want you to know about the Federal Reserve, which is the United States Central Bank, or what we call the Fed, if you're a cool kid, is essentially what they do is they regulate the money supply. Okay, they regulate the money supply. They regulate banks. Okay, they are the banker's bank, and they regulate banks. They tell banks how much they have to have on them, because a lot of times you think, you put your money in a bank, they're going to put it there in a safe and keep it for you, but really what they're doing, whenever you give them money, they're just taking it and they're loaning it out to somebody else. What the Fed is doing is they're telling them how much money they have to keep, right? They say, hey, you have to keep 10%, you have to keep 15%, banks, you can't just loan out all the money. However, right now that number is actually zero. The Federal Reserve has told banks that they can loan out as much money as they want to. That said, though, banks still aren't going to, loan out all the money, because they want to have money on hand for when people come to the bank to get their money. Okay, but they conduct this thing called monetary policy that we talked about in the last chapter. Just to give you a reminder here, the monetary the things that are used to conduct monetary policy, we talked about way back here on the last slide of the last lecture here, right? If you remember, we talked about this. The Feds control the money supply. But we're going to go ahead and review that again here on the next slide. But they're also the banker's bank. They loan money to banks. That is the other, and I guess last thing that they do that we're going to be concerned with. Okay? So, one body that controls the money supply is what we call the Federal Open Market Commission. And what they're concerned with is making sure prices remain stable, and the way they do that is by not releasing too much money, and of course on the flip side, they also want to make sure that prices aren't going down, right? We don't want to have deflation either. So we want to have prices remaining stable, right? The reason why is if prices are going up and we're having inflation, that means people just want to spend their money like mad because they don't want to be holding on to their money as it loses its value, okay? And we know that money has to be a store of value. It has to keep its value if you hold on to it, right? And on the other hand, we don't want money growing in value because the idea there, if money is growing in value, then people don't want to spend it. And that people aren't spending money, that defeats the whole purpose of money, right? We want people to be able to spend money because that is enabling us to be able to trade with one another. That's why money has value, right? So we don't want to have prices decreasing like mad. We don't want to have prices increasing like mad. We want to have prices stable, okay? And another thing they watch now is actually employment. They use unemployment as one of their indicators that they try to track and make sure that unemployment's not going crazy up and down in these large swings either. So what they use are those Federal Reserve requirements, which we talked about, where they tell banks, hey, you have to, instead of keeping 10, you have to keep 15, and that will decrease the money supply because banks can't loan out as much. They use this discount rate, how much they loan to banks at. Of course, if they're offering a lower rate to banks, that means banks are borrowing more money, which means we can borrow more money, and that will change the money supply. And they also use open market operations, where they buy those bonds that they can sell to banks. If they buy the bonds, then banks are getting money, which means the banks can loan us money, increasing the money supply. And if they sell those bonds to banks, then banks are giving money to the Fed, and the banks have less money, and the banks can't loan us as much, and therefore the money supply decreases, right? So those are all things that the Federal Reserve can use to increase or decrease the money supply. And the Federal Reserve, one last thing they do since 2008 has been paying interest to banks based on how much the banks have in reserves. And this incentivizes the banks then to not loan out as much money. So that then decreases how much money there is in the money supply, okay? So the last thing I want to talk about is this little equation here. Now, don't worry, we're not doing any math, but all I want you to see here is that this is what the Federal Reserve thinks that they're doing, okay? Because essentially, the amount of money and how quickly it's changing hands, they make the assumption that if there's more money, then therefore the amount of money we spend is equal to how much we're producing, right? That's the idea with GDP, that people are only going to be spending money on what is being produced, right? That's how we calculate GDP, right? We just take the dollar value of everything that we've produced and add it all up. So when I have P times Q, Q stands for output, right? So you take all the items that we've produced and multiply it by the prices of all those items, and that gets us our GDP, right? So their thought is if we increase how much money there is, people will be able to spend more, spend it faster. That's velocity, and that will increase our output. I think that's a large assumption, but even if it were true, it's very hard to determine that if we print more money, what will happen to GDP, right? It's hard to know how much money, when you print it, how that will increase or decrease the money supply. Some economists have equated trying to change the money supply with interest rates is like, pushing on a string and then, expecting it to go a certain way, right? Because that when you push on a string, it's going to, kind of curve out. It's not just going to go straight, right? You don't know which way a string's going to go when you push on it, okay? So one thing they've done now is kind of focused on open market operations instead of trying to change those interest rates and try to change the money supply. And one thing you can really see here is that whenever they have these low rates, this can lead to disincentives. The Federal Reserve, we talked about in the last chapter with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, because they had those low interest rates, this led people, because money was so cheap, to really spend money on a lot of things that they didn't or shouldn't have spent money on, right? Like a lot of housing being built in the early 2000s that really didn't need to be built. This caused a lot of overinvestment in the early 2000s, right? It is because of the Fed's low rate policy that we had that overinvestment in the early 2000s, okay? So, it's hard to know how much the money supply is going to change, and we can't just... while the Fed is responsible for that, it's a very, very tricky job, and we've seen a lot of booms and a lot of busts, a lot of times where, GDP will just be increasing, and then it'll have a sharp decline. And that's because a lot of the times when the Fed keeps their interest rates too low for too long, people are going to start, buying and investing things that they shouldn't, and then they're going to realize that they shouldn't have bought or invested in those things, and they'll start laying off their people, and their people, because they don't have an income, will stop buying from other people, and then that expands, right? So now other people are going to be losing their jobs because not as many people are buying from them, right? So it's very hard to do what the Fed says that they're trying to do while they're trying to control the money supply. And because of that, we can also see a lot of overinvestment when the Fed keeps their interest rates, too low for too long. Okay. So the book does a much better job of doing this. If you are in the normal econ class, make sure you're reading the book and filling out your reading guide. If you are in the dual credit class, then please read this and ask me if you have any questions. That will explain this slide a lot more. Okay, guys, I'm out of here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you when I see you next. Bye.